Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk. We're back with you guys for another show this week. A very special show and an absolute pleasure for me. I'm joined by an author, a journalist and a football pundit. My first question for you, Raphael Honigstein, is can you kick the ball well?
Yeah, I think I can. I've got 3 cruciate ligament injuries to show for it.
Nice.
But sort of half decent, I'd say.
Oh, well, we can share something in common because I've also done my ACL. So there's that already. Chemistry at the start, loving it. I suppose it would be, I wouldn't be doing my fans a favour and the listeners a favour if I didn't go straight in to ask the big question, which is encircling us as Arsenal fans on the Twitter sphere and through the media. Tell me your thoughts and any information you've gained on the rumour that Sven Mislintat is going to leave Arsenal.
Well, it's my understanding that he is leaving Arsenal. I don't think that the relationship between him and Raul Sanllehi has worked out as expected. It might not necessarily be something personal, but in terms of sort of the organizational structure of Arsenal, things have changed quite a lot. You have to remember when he was hired back in the autumn of 2017, he came in at the same time as Raul, and the two of them, along with Gazidis or Gazidis, I'm never quite sure. If you
we went with Gazidis, so
yeah, okay, fine. Anyway, the 3 of them were in charge of the commission, if you will, or the committee, trying to identify the next coach. So they were sort of on equal footing. Then, when Gazidis left, Raul was effectively promoted, and I think that was already sort of not necessarily as advertised as far as Sven was concerned. And then, of course, with the recent move towards appointing a technical director who would sit above Sven, I think he would eventually be only in inverted commas chief scout again, which is the job that he had at Dortmund, but which is not the job that he'd been signed up for. So, to cut a long story short, these things happen all the time in football, and this is kind of the stuff that happens at a normal football club. So, I'm inclined, if you now take out the personal issues here and sort of the more strategic issues of Arsenal, I would say this is actually a sign of Arsenal being a normal club, because you will see these this tussling for power. You'll see one guy who hasn't been hired by another guy then finding himself a little bit out in the cold because the new guy has a different idea and wants to bring in other people. So this is what happens at every given club. Arsenal fans have not been exposed to that for so many years that it sounds terrible and frightening and chaos. But actually, in a way, this is the sign of the club behaving in a normal way after 21 years of Arsene Wenger pulling the strings. Having said all that, it's, of course, interesting or worrying or exhilarating, whichever take you want, that the transfer policy will be affected by this. And it's going to be interesting if the initial idea that Gazidis had, that Sven was going to replicate his idea of finding sort of undervalued players, buying in a very different market than sort of the established elite would necessarily look at. If that's now gone completely out the window, or if whoever comes in to supplement him or to be in charge of scouting and recruitment after him will try to do the same thing, or will try to find a combination with the kind of perhaps more established players that Reiss Nelson will go after. So these are all things to work out, and that's really going to be the interesting thing. But as far as I know, there is really no way back for Sven, simply because things just haven't worked out the way he wanted it to.
A lot of people have interpreted his imminent departure in different ways. One of the viewpoints is the fact that because we're a club that isn't spending any money in January, we're not looking to buy anyone, and we're a club that's known for not obviously spending in the likes of Manchester City, Chelsea, Manchester United, etc. And then the other viewpoint of that compared to a scout who's obviously at a club with no money to spend, effectively. The other viewpoint being that actually we're a club in which we don't have much money to spend, and therefore a top quality scout would be able to identify the options in which are going to be cheap, or which are going to be coming from countries which maybe aren't so well known about by some of the other major clubs in the league. What side of the fence do you fall on in which Sven would have wanted? Because we've seen Aubameyang coming, for instance, from the Bundesliga for a big fee, and then we've seen someone like Mavropanos come on from a smaller fee from a not so well known region of Europe. So do you think he was doing a combination of those jobs, or was it specifically one way or the other?
I honestly cannot answer for him. All I know from having looked at his work at Dortmund and from knowing him a little bit is that he's a guy that works with the budget that's given to him. You know, he's not in charge of money. So if for whatever reason there is money in a specific year, he can suggest certain players. If there isn't, then he can't. But I don't necessarily think, and this is not something that I can really speak with a great authority, because I don't have any specific knowledge about that specific question, but just in theory, it would strike me as odd if the lack of money would suddenly be a decisive factor in him staying or leaving. I cannot imagine that would have been the issue. I think it's more to do with this, different shape of the organizational structure, and maybe a disagreement about the sort of players that the club were targeting that has led to this point. But the money itself, I personally don't think it was the reason. But this is just my opinion, and seen as me, talking with any great knowledge, because it's not something I really can shed any insight on.
I want to stick with your opinion on something, and probably the last question on Sven Mislintat specifically. In your opinion, in the long run, do you think this is going to be overall negative for Arsenal, and in theory, of course, or could it actually spark bringing in someone who could work better with the other members of the board that are there already?
I think this is an excellent question, and I think the thinking is that they want someone who's more aligned, maybe more culturally aligned. You know, the guy doesn't look like a football guy. He's German. He is blonde. He's not Spanish. He's not going to be the best buddy of Emery. Maybe they want someone more British, more in line with the existing scouts. Maybe they want someone from a Latin country who they feel is more sort of on the same page. So very, very difficult to say. I mean, my sense was that him coming from a Dortmund setup where disagreement was very much encouraged. It was part of the culture at the club. So when Zorc had a problem with something that Klopp did, which sort of at the intersection of their various competences, they would talk about this, and they would be very frank and very opinionated, and they would have sort of professional rows. It would never got personal, but then they sorted it out. And my sense is that this is something that really at the existing setup, because those professional and personal relationships just simply don't exist. This is all new people in the job, all trying to do something at a club that they haven't been at for a long time. Those things weren't really, I think, as part of the culture just yet. And it could well be that someone who is more to the personal liking of Raul, who is now the power figure, the power broker in the club, might work better in the construct. Whether that guy has the same kind of eye for people that might be underappreciated or overlooked, I think Aubameyang is a great example. I mean, people are saying to me, well, everyone knew about Aubameyang. Of course, you could have bought him for Dortmund. A lot of Premier League clubs looked at him. But the real point is, why did no one buy him from Saint-Etienne when he was the second leading scorer in France that year? I think I'm not mistaken, but that year, Arsene Wenger bought Olivier Giroud instead.
Yeah.
And you would have thought, someone who looks at the French league would have known that Aubameyang is this amazing guy, but everyone didn't. So that's where things get interesting. So I don't know. I don't know. I think it can work out either way, but I don't think that it necessarily. This goes back to my first answer, which was very convoluted. Apologies.
No, don't apologise for that.
I think that there is not necessarily a big reason to be despondent about what's happening. I think this is kind of a normal shake-up, a normal kind of thing that happens with a club in transition. Some people will succeed and thrive and sort of make it their club, and others, for whatever reason, don't. And this might take a couple of years for things kind of to be shaken up. And the more relevant question to me is not so much what does Raal want, or what does the new Sven Mislintat want, if there's going to be one appointed, but what does Sten Kroenke want? Because that, for me, that is the key question. If from America the instructions is just simply stay where you are, don't be too bad, but we don't really care whether you're fourth or sixth. It doesn't make a big difference. We don't want to spend a lot of money to make up this gap to become second or first. Then the people in charge will work to that brief. And I think that's where it gets more worrying and where you become more fatalistic as a club if that is the direction that comes down from the top. And we simply, I think, don't know enough to know what exactly is going on there.
The question we had come in from Twitter, and obviously we've had an absolute plethora of questions come in when they heard that you were coming on the show. And Richard Wright, who's a very loyal listener to the show, he said, and speaking about where we're going and Stan Kroenke being brought up, he says, what's the main objective for the club? Things look so positive but seem to be unravelling. Are we actually heading in the right direction?
I think you're broadly heading in the right direction. I think the change was inevitable. It came too late. I think even Ivan tried to set up the club for the future. I think he had some good ideas, but he kind of hired people and felt that his job was done. But I think, as was mentioned at the time, I think it was clear that the actual transition would take a bit longer. It's tough for me to really evaluate Unai Emery's work. I think he's a decent manager, but I'm not sure he has sort of the transformative nature, the strength of personality and charisma to really make this club and make this team his own. He seems a very decent guy, very professional. Training, by all accounts, has improved a lot. I think tactically Arsenal are trying to improve, but whether he sort of has that force of nature that perhaps this club would have needed after Wenger, someone who really would have come in and said, okay, now I'm going to be the guy who's going to take this club forward. I'm just not so sure. That's my concern. And of course, you're working in an environment where every one of your competitors has improved. Even Chelsea, who are stuttering, a million miles better than last year's Chelsea that finished in mid-table, or in 7th or 8th. So that is the problem. That is something that, if you're looking at it from the outside, if you're Sven Kroenke, you're thinking, is it worth now spending all this money to make up this ground, or am I just happy with things are as long as they don't get much worse? My hunch is it might be the second one, which could turn Arsenal into sort of into a club that might be stagnating a little bit longer before it really gets moving in a more immediately positive direction.
Yeah, that's right. When we're thinking about Arsenal moving in a direction and still sticking with the Germany theme, you can't really talk about people moving in the right direction without thinking about our highest paid player at the club, Mesut Ozil. Obviously, a lot went down for the German this summer with the embroilment around the World Cup and the controversies that followed. Do you think that has had an effect on his season so far? And ultimately, what is the reason for his lack of game time this season?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I haven't been told anything that makes me believe that there's been sort of a giant fallout or Emery saying, you're never going to play again. I haven't heard anything to that extent, to that effect. Do you remember there was a story about that so-called bust up at the training ground?
Yeah.
It's not something that I could stand up. The opposite. I was told there was nothing going on, that he was genuinely receiving treatment that day, Mesut. So I don't know. I mean, there comes a point where you're thinking this goes beyond what is sort of explicable in tactical terms. I mean, if somebody is really being frozen out to the extent that he seems to be over the last couple of weeks, you're thinking, is Emery, with the blessing of the club, one has to assume, is he just really trying to get rid of him? Is that him just saying, you know what, you're not going to play again, without actually having that talk? I mean, I think it's getting to the point where it looks as if he's trying to force him out of the club. But if that is really true or not, I don't know, because we don't really get enough communication to make that judgment with any degree of certainty. He's deliberately vague, and I think from what I've heard, he's just as sort of non-committed one way or the other towards Mesut, who's just basically trying to get back into the team and has absolutely no intention of leaving. So I don't know. I honestly don't know where this is going to end. I'd still like to think that even if you are Unai Emery and you've decided that Mesut Ozil is no longer in your plans, that there still might be a way to utilize him while you still have him, rather than saying, you know, I'm just going to not play you at all until you come to the point where you might want to leave. I think that is not the best way of using a large sum of money that is being paid to Mesut every single week. It's a strange situation, and I don't think that you can necessarily argue that the team is being helped by him not playing. If they'd gone to those more difficult games, the kind of games without possession where Mesut has perhaps struggled more than others, or has been more apparent than others because it's not his game without the ball, then you could say he's done everything right. But because Arsenal haven't really made sustained progress in those games either, and have lost heavily at Liverpool, for example, I think it's more difficult to make the argument that this is purely tactical, because it hasn't really had the desired effect in a positive way.
No, I think Mesut Ozil is certainly a player that divides opinion. Obviously, running this channel, and we have regular guests on each week, and the division on Mesut Ozil is very apparent amongst them as well. And there's regular debates on whether he should have left years ago, or if he should be sold soon, or whether we should keep him to the end of his contract. But the fact that he's not playing is concerning for a lot of Arsenal fans, and the fact that we saw a game against West Ham at the weekend in which we lacked so much in terms of creativity, it baffles me that he is being frozen out seemingly and it's the reason is given that it's tactical decision. But in my head, I can't see how it's tactical to leave arguably your most creative player out on the pitch when you desperately need it so much. Last thing on Ozil, if you're the player and this is down to tactical reasons, would you feel treated unfairly by Emery if that is purely the reason being given?
Well, I mean, it depends what it really means, tactical reasons. Does tactical reasons mean that you're just not good enough to play anymore in my team? Or does it mean that there are certain teams or certain games where I want different solutions? I think if it was the latter one, if there was a sense, you know, he's 30 now and maybe he'll be used more sparingly, and maybe we're mixing up the formation a little bit, maybe adjusting a bit more. But when it comes to deep teams at home, the kind of situations where you really need somebody that turns sort of door opener with a decisive ball or whatever, then we'll need you. But I think you need to have that kind of that story, if you will, that you're being told as a player and as a public needs to make sense. And I think that's what I said earlier. I think it's more difficult now to see what it is that it actually means when you say it's tactical. And I think that's where I'm sure any player would be a little bit puzzled and sort of doubting themselves and thinking, you know, what is it that I have to do here? There's one thing to say away to Liverpool, we want a more defensive setup. Another to say, you know, against the likes of West Ham, we don't need any creative player in the middle. We can do it a different way. If it works out, it's great. But if it doesn't, then I think you do start wondering. But I don't see that as a sustainable situation if we don't have some more clearer and kind of decisive idea of what it is that Emery wants to do with Mesut. I think that point of reckoning is coming, and I think clarity is needed.
I think clarity is definitely needed for both us as fans and obviously the player as to what's going on, and whether we'll know that actually happens, we'll just have to wait and see. But moving now towards the Bundesliga, and I focus on that. One of my regular guests and one of my good friends who hails from New York City, Drew, he's obviously a big fan of the Bundesliga, and he could talk me to death, frankly, on German football. But he sent in a really good question for you. It's a bit of a thinker, so sorry to come out of the blue with it. But he says, if you had to name one Bundesliga player who's 24 or younger, and at Arsenal's realistic price range that they could bring in to improve the first team, who would that be?
So this is the sort of information that you get paid a lot of money for. Do this properly.
Feel free to give me the cut price version if that's
preferred. Well, until you talked about the price range, I had a few answers, but now that it's only loan deals, sorry to rub it in. I don't know. I mean, look, the young guys that are on everyone's radar are Timo Werner, Kai Havertz. There's Nico Schulz, who's a little bit older. I mean, they're Jonathan Tah.
Yeah.
But I would really need to know if I'm going to be doing Sven's job from now on, and it could be taken as a job application.
It could happen. Could happen.
My rates might be reasonable. I would need I need to know what area we're looking in.
Okay, well, Arsenal need a centre-back, so let's focus on that area. If they're 24 or younger, let's say I'll give you a price range of max 30 million bid, 24 or younger. How's that sound?
Yeah, sounds pretty good. I mean, I like Jonathan Tah a lot.
Yeah.
He's very, very good. I think he's still only 22 or 23.
A couple of the Dortmund centre-backs, I mean, how's Diallo getting on, for instance?
Oh, no, all the Dortmund ones are brilliant, but I think the price range is a real issue there. Let's leave price aside. I mean, Zagadou looks great. Diallo looks like an absolute steal. Akanji, who I thought was nailed on for the Premier League, and Liverpool looked at, and then no one went for him, has been outstanding. He's injured now, but I think he's been absolutely brilliant. All those three guys are really, really good. But whether Arsenal can afford them or not, I simply don't know. Then when you are looking sort of further down, you don't necessarily get the kind of proven quality that you want immediately to improve the team. And that's exactly where ideally you'd have someone who buys Akanji before he goes to Dortmund. You know, when he's still at Basel, and you can buy him for 15 million euros rather than buying him 2 years later from Dortmund for 40. But we'll see if Arsenal will be in that sort of market again. I think there is no other choice. And if you sort of scale that up a little bit, you see now Bayern chasing Callum Hudson-Odoi.
Yeah,
basically the same story, because they know once Hudson-Odoi plays a couple of seasons in the first team anywhere, he will be worth, if his progress is as anticipated, he will no longer be in the price range of 30 to 40, but 60 to 70. And that's the reason why they missed out both on Sané and Kevin De Bruyne, who were in front of their own noses in their backyard, if you will, playing for Schalke and Wolfsburg respectively, because at the time they thought these are crazy prices. But they've since realized that if you don't buy these players for those prices, then they will be triple figures a couple of years later. So that then has a knock-on effect on everyone. And I think if you want to be sort of in the mid-market, sort of B players, if you will, and I don't mean that disrespectfully at all. No. It's going to be really, really tough. Really tough, unless you have some really smart ideas and some great know-how.
I think sticking with the theme of the which is apparently a new craze in Germany, to bringing in these English youngsters, which I can understand, and from hearing you speak on the Totally Football Show about how German scouts are going to English clubs and seeing these youngsters who are never really going to get an opportunity in a first team in a top 6 Premier League side, that they can take these guys and use them to their benefit. And it really is. And someone who that's worked for is obviously our own Reiss Nelson at Arsenal, who's at Hoffenheim. I know that you're a reader of the site which I write for, Total Football Analysis, and whilst I'm providing them with my love of things, being the Spanish side of stuff, there's some fantastic writing going on. And an article by Loriana Shashkova talks about how Arsenal's new generation are getting on. She speaks about Reiss Nelson, and she concludes the piece talking about how next season Reiss Nelson could be lining up next to the likes of Aubameyang and Lacazette. How realistic of a theory do you think that is?
I don't know if he's going to be lining up next to them in the starting 11, but he's certainly a guy that will improve your options up front. And I don't think he would get anywhere near the conversation if he now spent another year being in and out of the Carabao Cup at Arsenal or on loan in the Championship. So just the fact that you can play Champions League, that you can play against top opposition every single week makes a huge difference. There is a theory, there's two theories about player development. One is the best will always make it, and you just basically doesn't really matter what you do with them. They're so good that they come through, whether you stick them in the reserves or the under 23s or in the second or first division or abroad. They're so good that they come good. I don't subscribe to that. I think human beings don't work like that. I think they need to be fostered. I think that they need to be given time, confidence, a bit of love, sometimes a bit of tough love, but real. They need real nurturing. And I think these guys have realized that doing all that in the first team of one of the best leagues in Europe is much preferable than playing 46 games in a championship, with some agricultural football at times, or somewhere where you just get lost in that Neverland between the first and the second team. You don't really know who you are. So I think Arsenal have been really, really smart here by not letting him go on a transfer, but actually still being in control and still having the ability to look at his progress and then deciding whether he's quite good enough to make the first team or not. Manchester City would love to have that option with Jadon Sancho, because if they want to now have him back, they will have to pay the best part of 100 million euros for a guy who they've just lost for 10 only 2 years, well, less than 2 years ago. So I think Arsenal, as far as Reiss Nelson are concerned, are actually in a great position.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. If he comes back and he's only playing a bit part again, considering he's only just signed a new contract, we'd hope he signed that new contract with being told that he's obviously going to get more opportunities in the first team after arriving back from Germany. It's great. It'll be great to see him back again. Hopefully he can get into that first team. Last couple of questions. I don't want to keep up too much of your time. We started with rumours, obviously, about Mislintat, and we're coming to the end with a penultimate question, thinking about rumours again. It might be silly season, and this might be a silly question, but James Rodriguez to Arsenal. How likely is this one?
I don't quite know where the story comes from, to be perfectly honest. So James Rodriguez is on a 2-year loan at Bayern at the moment. He's approaching the last 6 months of that 2-year loan. Bayern, I think, have paid something like 10 or 12 million euros for those 2 years. And then they have an option to make the move permanent by paying another 42 million euros. Now, I don't see what Bayern would gain now from somehow breaking that loan short and then what? And then giving him to Arsenal for half a year on the loan of a loan? I don't even know how you would structure that. If the player says, there's no way I want to stay here, then he goes back to Real Madrid, and then Real Madrid can decide what they want to do. But that he would somehow now being released 3 quarters into a 2-year loan, just when Bayern don't have Thomas Müller for the next 2 Champions League games, it's just a crazy story. And I just don't understand who even had the imagination to come up with it.
It's a really strange one, but I shouldn't be surprised, because obviously January transfer window often throws up these strange stories. But yeah, my thinking was pretty much on par with yours. It makes absolutely no sense for me. And whilst believe me, I would take him with open arms, and it'd be interesting to see what he'd do. And we're desperate for creativity, and he could probably provide that. But I want to round off the show as continuous as possible, and that's in the same vein as we end every show, and that's with a look forward to Arsenal's next game. And obviously it's quite a big one, Arsenal against Chelsea. I just want to get your prediction for that game and how you see it panning out.
I think very similar to the first two games we've seen what was the first one?
Man City, where we lost 2-0, and then we lost 3-2 against Chelsea in the second match.
Yeah, so really open, lots of chances. Because Chelsea have flaws because there's sort of an unfinished article under Sarri, and the same is true of Emery. And I don't think both teams are very good defensively. And I think they're both best when they attack. And then it'll come down to who's just a bit better in the box. I think that Arsenal have better strikers. Chelsea have a better midfield and probably better defense. I think it's going to be really even. I don't think that this is a game that you should feel really worried about as an Arsenal fan. Of course, it's going to be close and it's difficult to touch, but I can actually Arsenal see winning that. I don't think it's as daunting as it would have been a few years ago when you kind of knew that you play against Chelsea and, bad things would happen. Certainly at Stamford Bridge. I don't think that Arsenal fans should be pessimistic about this one at all.
I'm going to press you for a score prediction, if that's okay.
I'll say 2-1 Arsenal.
Awesome. Love the positivity. Thank you, Rafa, for taking time out of your evening to come on this evening.
My pleasure.
Awesome.
Sorry for rambling on a bit.
Oh, please ramble all you like, mate. Ramble all you like. Thank you, everyone who is listening live. Over 200 of you this evening, which is fantastic. And if you're watching on playback, you'll be able to click in the description to read Rafa's article from, I believe it's ESPN, on Sven Mislintat's imminent leave. But thank you again, Rafa, for coming on. And hopefully, maybe towards the end of the season, maybe in the next transfer window full of rumours in the summer, we can have you back.
Yeah, sure. Be happy to.
Awesome. Hope you've enjoyed this. Please like and subscribe if you're new here. And if you've enjoyed it, we'll see you again after the Chelsea game, 9 o'clock on Sunday. See you again very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.